In this video, I will attempt to give you tools to appreciate abstract expressionism, an often overlooked and lambasted direction in the visual arts spectrum. Whether you come to this diatribe as a staunch opponent of abstract expressionism, someone who's eager to learn more about art, or simply a fan of abstract expressionism looking for your daily fix of catharsis, I hope you'll enjoy this video and consider subscribing for more videos like this in the future. In general, people judge the quality of art based on two factors: the skill needed to create it and how pleasant it is to observe. Objectively, abstract expressionism falls short in both of these parameters and is often the point of ridicule, hate, and envy, maybe especially from those who see the success of the expressionists as unjust, some of them being hopeful artists themselves. Yet, paintings by artists such as Barnett Newman, Jackson Pollock, and Mark Rothko sell for millions of dollars. So, why is that? Art does not exist in a vacuum. That much is a fact. Not only is all art consciously or subconsciously inspired by the art that came before it, but it will also inescapably be inspired by the world around it at the time. One early significant example of this is The Raft of the Medusa by Théodore Géricault, painted in 1819 when Géricault was 27 years old. It's a beautiful painting and ridiculously huge too, standing at 5 meters tall and 7 meters wide. But what is truly significant about it is what it depicts. A shipwreck that only 3 years earlier became internationally controversial due to reports of cannibalism and French naval incompetence. This is special because it was the first painting to document contemporary events. As you may be aware, paintings before this were largely biblical, historical, or fictional. As such, it is one of the first paintings in the Western canon that cannot be fully appreciated outside of its historical context. If you're able to accept this for The Raft of the Medusa, you may be able to accept this for abstract expressionist art pieces as well. You see, the term modern art is often thrown around lightly where contemporary art is more appropriately used. This may be because at one point in our very near past, modern was contemporary. In general, modern art started ever so slightly with the Impressionists of the late 1800s and was succeeded by postmodernism sometime during the 60s or 70s. Yet amongst non-artsy people, abstract expressionism is often thrown around as something being made today, removing it from its post-war context. And if contextual art began with Géricault and The Raft of the Medusa, it had certainly reached its zenith in the era immediately following World War II. Even today, the atrocities of the Second World War may leave us speechless and unable to comprehend such gruesome evil. In the immediate aftermath, you can just imagine how pointless, cynical, and rid of any beauty the world must have seemed to a lot of people, and especially to Jews. It should be noted that several of the prominent artists in the abstract expressionist movement, among them the aforementioned Barnett Newman and Mark Rothko, were themselves Jews. Maybe more so than any artist before them, the abstract expressionists put less emphasis on the singular piece of art in itself, and more emphasis on their artistry as a whole. And as such, it would perhaps be more appropriate to judge their art not based on every piece on its own, but rather to see every artist for the totality of their expression. I guess what I'm trying to say in the most respectable manner I can. You can't neglect the fact that Mark Rothko was a nihilist post-war Jew trying to convey tragedy and existential heartbreak in the least representational way imaginable when you view his art. The reason why Orange, Red, Yellow sold for a whopping $86 million in 2012 isn't because it itself is the pinnacle of what humans can portray on canvas, but because of the significance of its artist, Mark Rothko. And when you think about it, in the post-war world, it seems weird that we should hold visual art to another standard than other forms of art, for instance, music. Back in the day, songs like Tom Dooley, Oh My Darling Clementine, and Down by the Riverside were folk songs, not necessarily connected exclusively to whomever claimed to have written or performed it first, while a song like Hey Jude or Strawberry Fields Forever are both inseparable from the artistic entity of the Beatles. And even more keen observers will probably link either of these specifically to Paul McCartney or John Lennon respectively too, and any subsequent cover of these songs are rarely seen as their own piece of art, rather a tribute or homage. Likewise, the European fairy tales of old collected by the Brothers Grimm are largely accepted to be authorless oral tradition, while a story like To Kill a Mockingbird can never be separated from its author Harper Lee and her lived experience that served as the inspiration for her story. Another oft neglected factor in the evolution of art is the slow emergence of the photographic camera during the course of the 19th century. It is indeed very interesting to observe the gradual descent from realism to abstraction that happened during this 100-year span, as opposed to works from a time before the conception of the camera. Comparing, for instance, any of Rembrandt's meticulously constructed portraits to any of the so-called black paintings by Spanish painter Francisco de Goya, like the well-known Saturno devorando a su hijo, or Saturn devouring his son, painted in the early 1800s, shows a sudden neglect for anatomical correctness and surgical lighting where this can serve a dramatic purpose. Comparing De Goya again to something like Claude Monet's Impression Soleil Levant, painted in 1872, discernible lines in the motif have been all but thrown out the window, the painting rather letting us believe in the suggestion of form. One can pretty much infer that as photography became more and more advanced and adept at capturing real life in high quality form, the century-old tradition and necessity of art capturing reality became more and more redundant, leaving it with the task of encapsulating abstract concepts that cameras could not, such as emotions, ideas, and human contemplations. It is therefore not all that surprising that in the early post-war period, when color photography was very well a thing, although still the underdog to its way more chemically stable brother, black and white photography, painters were left without much actual purpose, as initial skepticism towards the craft of photography had been turned to optimism and excitement. As one may well say, why would you want your portrait painted to some degree of realism when the ability to have an actual true-to-life imprint of yourself was that much more available? Although one could argue that home photography didn't really become a big thing until the release of digital cameras in the 1990s, it was still common for at least one person in the home to have a camera and being someone able to use it or know someone who was. At the end of the day, I don't think it necessarily takes a lot of intellect to appreciate abstract expressionism. What you need is context. Context is also important for understanding that the advent of oil painting as an artistic medium is the reason why Renaissance art looks so much more vivid than medieval art, and why the Impressionists are so culturally revered today, while their technically superior contemporaries at the Salon are not. For the sake of context, I think it is worth mentioning that neither of the three abstract expressionists I have focused on in this video, Newman, Pollock, or Rothko, appeared on the scene by random. Each of them started their careers painting considerably more representational art, those by Rothko in particular appearing more in line with what many would consider good art today. With all this being said, it may appear apparent that I'm yet to make an argument for the abstract expressionist art itself being good or worth your contemplation, and as esoteric as it may sound, I also think a lot of this art is great, although maybe not on your computer screen. You see, again, this is about context, because while they occupy the size of a sheet of printing paper at most, if seen in full screen on your computer, the actual paintings are several meters high and wide, and in my opinion are best observed in a museum that allows for full concentration and engorging in the painting, rather than in the distracting environment of your own home. Mark Rothko paintings have made grown men cry, and while I will always suspect some of those of being self-absorbed and melodramatic, it speaks to the power the art holds trapped between the dried paint and canvas. And that would be the end of it, but I would be amiss if I didn't briefly mention kitsch interior art parading as abstract expressionism. It's almost funny to me how art that post-war Jews used to express their lack of belief in a good world is imitated to look good with your couch. The discussion of what is art and what isn't exactly what I hope to talk about in this video, but intent is of the essence here, and there are reasons mentioned earlier that I think explain why imitations of abstract expressionism don't hold the same merit as, for instance, imitations of Baroque art. In closing, I find it somewhat disingenuous to talk about abstract expressionism as a movement when I spent most of this video reinforcing how important and downright crucial the artist as an individual is to see the full context of the paintings in question. But it is a way more practical way of defending the artist's case. In other words, I think it's totally natural to be more interested in some abstract expressionists than others. For instance, I myself am way more intrigued by Mark Rothko than I am by someone like Barnett Newman, even if both are great painters and expressionists in their own right. So, that's it. some words in defense of an art movement that I hold dear to my heart and that receives a disproportionate amount of flack, in my opinion. As I said in the beginning, I would deeply appreciate if you chose to subscribe to the channel and follow me for more videos like this, as I can assure you I have more art related topics buzzing around in my head. Until next time, goodbye.